Before the Rings of Power, there were the Silmarils. Before Sauron, there was his master Morgoth. Before Aragorn and Arwen, there was Beren and Luthien. Join us as we explore Tolkien and all the ages of Middle-earth with your hosts from theonering.com, Jonathan Watson and Michael Grumbine.
So I know I mentioned this last week, although, hey, look, it's oh wait, right there on that side. It's the Middle-earth Mixer. He's with us again this week. Really
I'm gonna interrupt you because I got to say again, you know, I always talk about the intro, but this time I love the just that you have like your two pictures and it's like Jonathan Watson and it has you like
you know, I have to say, like hearing
okay,
hearing our names said by Austin is like it's like I want him to announce if I ever gain some sort of noble rank in England, I want him to be my announcer as I walk in to some formal event. It's just the guy has an amazing voice. So
okay, first of all,
I'm not supposed to say his name out loud.
Sorry. No, I didn't say that. You can do that. No. What's funny is that like I didn't make any of that. Actually, what you saw right there, Austin did all the voices, and I did the original intro, but I'm not very good at video editing. And so, somebody who listens to the podcast, who's their day job is a special effects editor, was like, "Hey, I can do something better." And so his name's Fra. He's part of our Discord chat, and he was like, "Here you go." And I'm like, "Oh my god, that's so good." So anyway,
half my content on X comes from people who are like, "Hey, I made this for you." I'm like,
so awesome. Yeah, no,
I'm gonna use this all the time now.
Like, oh my gosh,
doesn't it give you the sense that like kind of this is what the internet is for? Like this is what it's supposed to be like.
I just
communities getting together,
speak things into the ether,
okay,
and then people like spit it back out in my replies.
But I was gonna say, like, you guys, like, totally, like, excuse me, aside from here, I was gonna say, like, what's funny is like we get deep into Tolkien, right? We really do. Like the Aldarion and Erendis, so few people know about this story. They don't listen to it much. And I know last week I mentioned the Rings of Power video. I just kind of did it in one evening and just threw it together. It has almost 50,000 views now on YouTube. And I'm like, oh my gosh. You know how many views this here has? This our last episode that I published a few days ago. It has
210.
Yeah, 200, not 10. 200 people are like, Aldarion and Erendis, what is it? I don't care about this. Just hate the Rings of Power more, which is easy to do. But
look, hate drives the clicks. But ultimately, I'd rather hang out with the 200 that like this video than the 50,000 that
100%. Yes, totally true.
For clarity, yes, I do not like Rings of Power, but this is
all you really need is a seriously like deep fried and distorted picture of Morfydd Clark, and you'll just
that's true. Throw some tears on there.
Yeah.
Well, I'm trying. This next one is going to be without Morfydd Clark. It's with the Gandalf because there's some Gandalf rumors that came out, and that's going up in a day. Well, it'll actually already be out by the time this episode comes out. All right. Anyway, those 200 people who are listening are probably members of our Discord chat. So you should click the link below and become a member. Join us on Discord. And if you want to get the extended podcast and you want to get the super special hidden behind the locked door Discord channels, you can become a member at theonering.com/member. First month's free, $4 a month after that, just to give us that support that we need to keep it going. And if you can't do that, we'd love a review on Apple Podcasts because that tells them there are more people listening to the show and raise it up and we're getting more people and more interactions and more questions. It's a great thing. So do that. We love you guys. Appreciate it. We are still into Aldarion and Erendis. And this is what episode 4 of a 60-page story. I feel like we're really getting into the details, but I love it because this episode in particular, we're all 3 dads. Now, Michael, you've lived the most dad life of all of us. I've lived kind of the middle range, and a mixer here. He has the new dad. Everything is like very, I don't know what's the it's like it's the taste is so new and special that everything is really clear to him right now. Right? He's seeing things, the difference between where it was and where he is. And so I love that we're talking about Ancalime, the daughter of Erendis and Aldarion, in this episode. So we're going to divide this up into 3 parts. There's 3 parts. The first part we're going to talk about is right after their wedding. So Michael, why don't you get us started, kind of set the scene here where we are right after their wedding, and how, you know what, they're happy. It's the first time that they're happy.
In a rare event for this story, there's some happiness for about a page and a half, and or maybe not even that. But we've just finished with the elven gifts we mentioned last time. So the elves gave them flowers and birds as their wedding gifts,
and a tree.
And a tree, you're right, and a tree, which Aldarion immediately started looking at like it was lumber. So Aldarion. And so the birds are these special birds. They never sing the same song twice, and they mate for life, and they're basically going to be a symbol of the marriage, which will be rejected in this reading that we're talking about today. So basically, this reading is broken into 3 parts, as Jonathan mentioned before we began recording, which is the time from the marriage of Aldarion and Erendis through the conception of their daughter and the birth of her, and all the way until she is either 4 or 5 years old. I just went blank on it. And at which 4, thank you. And then she gets 4 because it's 5 years, and she's at sea, and then she's 9 when he returns. Okay, so we have the time when he stays at home, which is, I guess, 2 years after she's born. So then she's 4, so it's 6 years that they are happily married, and they have a daughter. And then the sea longing takes him, and after some drama, he leaves, promising that he's going to be back in 2 years. And we all know how that ends with Aldarion. So the second part of the story is the length of time that he's gone, which is 5 years. And so his daughter, this is their daughter Ankalime, is from between the ages of 4 and 9. And this is the story of Erendis, basically her retreat from the world. That's stage 2 of this reading tonight, is her retreat from the world and the attitude she takes upon herself and the culture that she creates in her home, in the very, very middle of Númenor, as far from the sea as she can possibly get. And yep.
Yeah, go ahead. You finish.
And then final stage is 5 years later, when Aldarion returns home, and to his home on the coast in Armenelos, and that is cold and empty. His meeting with his father, Meneldur, who quickly shoves him out to go find his wife, and then his not so joyful reunion with his wife, and what follows after that, and basically their separation, and we're going to stop right when Tar Meneldur is about to open the letter. It's one of these, meanwhile, back at the ranch scenarios where we were about to cut to Tar Meneldur, who had been left with a letter that Aldarion gave him from Gil-galad. And so that's where we're stopping tonight. So 3 stages: happiness, time at sea, and the unhappy return of
Although that happiness really only lasted 5 sentences. Because it really is true, right? It's funny. Mixer and I, we were talking before even you came on, Michael. We were talking about time and how when you have kids, you become more like, you realize how much time is spent with them and how much little of your own time he has. And Aldarion is probably like, okay, he got married. All right, I got a little less time. He has a kid. Oh my gosh, time is even. My time is now taken up by even more than just my wife. It's now the kid. And then he really wants to leave the sea, right? So it's sort of like he wants to reclaim himself, his time, right? He can't spend this whole time ashore now. He'd been planting a lot of trees, so there's sufficient timber in Númenor, owing chiefly to his prudence. And so he's like, well, I don't need to do anything here. Like, there's nothing for me here anymore. We got plenty of trees. I got a kid, so they're sucking my time down. I think it's time to go to the ocean.
I mean, Armenelos is essentially like, he's a 2-trick pony throughout this whole story. He does only 2 things. Did I say? What did I say?
You said Armenelos.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, wow, words. Okay, so Aldarion is a 2-trick pony. He just plants trees, or he leaves for the ocean. That's what he does in these stories. And one of the things I actually read it aloud. My wife and I took turns reading this section back and forth, and she had some funny comments about this story, but which I will relate as we reach them. But one of the overarching theme, this is going to be my arc during this conversation, is I think this reading tonight encapsulates what is essentially, and we had plenty of foretelling before this, but this is the meat of 2 people married, who continuously they begin to and bring to fruit the rejection of the heart of marriage, both of them. So both of them are rejecting what really becomes it ought to be the heart of marriage. See, you made a good point, Jonathan, that Aldarion is like, okay, he's got a kid and the sea longing is growing. He's getting antsier and antsier, and he's got to go do his thing. Like, Mariner's got to sail, right? So that's what he's doing. But once you're married and you have children, that's not what you ought to be doing, in the sense that shouldn't be the center of your life. It can be what you do to a certain extent, although there is this inherent tension with the mariner's life and the married life. But the center of his life ought to be his wife and child, and as she points out, hopefully more than one child, because an heir. So hopefully, because the line is passed through the male in Númenor. So that should have been his focus. And instead, he's like, yeah, I've given you a lot of years now. I've been hanging around for 5-6 years, right. So it's time for me to go. And that shows the beginning of the rejection of what is really the heart of his vocation, which is marriage. Yeah. And then after he leaves, we see the rejection of the heart of marriage in his wife, where she becomes bitter towards him, and everything that she ought to be doing in terms of being a good wife and also a noble wife. She should be with the court. Like, she has a daughter that is the daughter of the heir of Númenor. So she should be with the court and and their the daughter's grandparents, or at least the royal grandparents. And she rejects everything. She just retreats to this home in the middle of nowhere. Won't even have any men around at all. Menelder's first full-blown feminist, apparently, and that's the so to me, that's, and my wife, when we were reading it, like, we were realizing this is a story of the rejection of the heart of marriage by both sides, and we see both. So anyway,
I laughed, Michael, when you said that you and your wife were reading this out loud together, because I had a really busy day, so I was kind of recapping this section of the story on my phone. I had the PDF open on my phone, and I had a Jersey Mike sub in one hand, and I was recapping on the other. And I was eating, and I looked up at my wife. I was like, I think you'd really like this story.
Wait. You can't leave it there. How would she like this story?
She was like, how would I like the story? I was like, there's a lady in here. I just feel like you'd be siding with her the whole time.
Oh, man.
Which, understandably so. Man. I mean, he's
how many years have you been married? Is it you were married 2 years? You had your kid, and now no, I'm joking.
No, my wife, she's a good sport of all the jokes that I like to make, but no, I think that there's a couple big things that jumped out at me here, because I started thinking about, like, I've read, there's a couple different Tolkien biographies, and I think his last name's Humphrey. This was the one I was reading.
Humphrey Carpenter, yeah.
This is his first name, but yeah, the Humphrey Carpenter Tolkien biography talks about some of the little spats that Tolkien would get in with Edith, or kind of the hard line that he set, where he basically was like, look, I'm going to be hanging out with the boys a couple nights a week. That's just how this is going to go. And you should just get on board. And he also mentions the letter where Tolkien is giving Christopher marriage advice down the line. And he's like, look, if you want to hang out with the boys, you need to let her know at the beginning so she knows what's up, or something along those lines.
She has to know what she's getting into.
Yeah. So it kind of made me think of that. And then also there was I thought of the trees kind of in a different way, because the first time when I read this, you're reading about all the trees that Aldarion wants to cut down, and it's basically all he thinks about all the time when he's not out in the ocean. And I never thought about how much disdain is Tolkien, how much is he feeling as he's writing this, because of his love for trees, which is something that I didn't think about before. I only thought about it in terms of corruption of Númenor and the desire to make ships and the desire to go elsewhere, but I didn't think of it from the perspective of how much does Tolkien hate this character that he's writing right now because of the disrespect for the trees. And the third one that I thought would be interesting to focus on was I can't remember if it was Erendis's mother or Aldarion's mother who made the comment about his Aldarion's love not being truly for the sea, even though he says that it is.
That was Nuneth. That was Erendis's mother.
Right, but it's actually he's chasing dreams, and the dreams are of sort of a ascendant Númenor, an ascendant and conquering Númenor of men going to new lands, but it's something that he doesn't consciously know, which I thought was interesting because I don't remember if I picked up on that last time, but it definitely ties into the whole idea of corruption, which Michael, you and I really touched on the first time I hopped on here to discuss this story.
Yeah, that line I have highlighted too. At least there's a few sentences about it. One is so it was that ere long he turned again from forestry to the building of ships, and a vision came to him of a mighty vessel like a castle with tall masts and great sails like clouds, bearing men and stores enough for a town. Because this is what Númenor says to Erendis. I think that is not the winds or the great waters that so burn his heart, nor yet the sight of strange lands, but some heat in his mind or some dream that pursues him. And I thought about, that's not the right word, not the catastrophe, but how Iluvatar moves in ways we don't move, that he moves right in ways that are necessary. So for instance, we know that by the end of this here story, spoiler warning, that Gil-galad is very happy with Aldarion. He appreciates him a lot for all the work. He's the greatest elf friend, I think, great or greatest, I can't remember the exact word used. And so I think they know that they see the shadow coming, and they see that Aldarion, he's a man with great vision, and he's not afraid to take big steps or take big swings of the bat to, nail the guy to the wall if he needs to. So that's a really horrible mixing of metaphors right there. However, and so even here, I think you see like maybe there's some movement. You could say that like there's something driving him forward that's necessary for the defeat of Sauron eventually in Númenor. I don't know. It's just a thought that struck me that he's a man of great vision, and the men of great vision, they do great things, and sometimes they leave a wake of disaster behind them, literally in his boat. But yeah.
Well, I love what both of you said there, because what it shows to me too is the counterpoint to a thing that's often said about Tolkien's writing, that he writes characters that are too black and white. There's it's too simplistic.
Yeah.
So when you look at Aldarion and his character, very interesting, because as you pointed out, Mixer, Tolkien himself, there seems to be an element of some autobiographical relationship between man and wife that he might be inserting here a little bit, although I know it's dangerous to read too much into that kind of stuff. But it is, I do think it's fair to say it's there to some degree. And yet, so Aldarion, he in order to write that, he would have to identify with Aldarion in some way. And yet he has to despise Aldarion because Tolkien was a great lover of trees, and Aldarion only saw trees in the classic. It's a classic Augustinian filter, which is, do you love a thing because you love what you can use it for, or do you love a thing because you love it for itself? And the elves love things for themselves, as showed by their comment at the end of last week's reading, that they don't know whether the tree that they've given Aldarion is good for lumber, because they've never thought of it that way. They just enjoy it for its beauty. But Aldarion only sees it for its use. So there has to be a kind of level on which Aldarion, I agree with you, is despised by Tolkien, but also there's a level on which Aldarion is, Tolkien must identify with him in some way. And in addition to that, Jonathan's point, there's a level on which Aldarion, okay, look, this is the second part of the story from today that we're jumping to right now, but he returns back, and his father, who I remind everyone is the king of Númenor, and if anything, if anyone in Númenor should be concerned with the place of Númenor in the world and the good of the whole people and what Aldarion, his heir, has been doing, it would be him. And yet Meneldur won't even talk to him about that. He just sends him off because in Meneldur's mind, Aldarion's failing at job number one, which is being a husband and a father, and which, fair enough. But Aldarion has in mind the greater good of Númenor. And Tolkien has this very nuanced view of that, right? Gil-galad tells us, although this is next week, but he will tell us how much he admires Aldarion and what great works he's done. But but everyone in Númenor that we know of, not everyone, the Venturers don't, but besides the Venturers, everyone else seems to look down on Aldarion. It's not even
the people who matter. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah,
it's not even just the father and his wife, and eventually his own daughter. But Tolkien makes a couple comments that the people themselves were cold towards him because they thought he had done wrong by Erendis, both in the betrothal stage and in this stage. And so there's a very nuanced character here. Aldarion isn't black or white. He's definitely a tragic character, and there's almost everything about his relationship with his wife is not to be envied or emulated, clearly in Tolkien's mind. But he has this great part to play, that the salvation of Middle Earth at a certain stage depends upon his work. And so this is not a black or white character. This is a character that's very interesting in my mind.
Yeah, I always think that criticism is so stupid. When we talk about black and white lines, and I don't know if you've ever seen me, but I share that meme, and it always goes viral every time I share it. It's like it's a very simple.
I don't. I'm not a big X guy, Twitter guy.
It's a very simple difference between Tolkien and George R.R. Martin, and it's like black and white characters, and then the George R.R. Martin one is, wouldn't it be great if everything's gray? And obviously it's not an intellectual meme. It's just it's very trolly, so it gets a lot of attention for that reason. But one of the things that I always see in the criticism is, that Tolkien's world is too simple, black and white's dumb, gray characters are better. And we're not saying that there's no gray characters in Tolkien's world. Tolkien's world has gray characters. The world itself is governed by black and white. Mm-hmm. It's not that the characters aren't gray.
Exactly.
It's that the rules that govern the universe are not gray. And that's something that people can't get through their skull, and I don't understand why. I guess it's a lack of war knowledge. I don't know.
Yeah, and I have a different opinion on why they can't get it through their skull. I think they can. I think they don't want to, because there's a kind of excuse making that we do for the gray in us, and I think that I'm afraid that's the source of a lot of the vitriol towards Tolkien about black and white characters, is they want to criticize black and white because no one wants to feel judged for their own actions by the black or the white. And so anyway, that's my suspicion. But I agree with you. There are gray characters everywhere in Tolkien, and the gray is sometimes quite interesting. Like the good that Aldarion does long term for Númenor, fantastic. Also, that good long term and for Middle Earth, fantastic. Also ends in tragedy. Also, the seeds of destruction of Númenor are sold. So it's not just like you think he's a black character, but he's really a white character. You think he's a black character, he's really a white character until the white becomes the black. In other words, the doom of Númenor is sown by his empire building. And so it's a fascinating.
Between the love that Erendis and Aldarion had its black moments and had its white moments until he left. When she said he hated the sea and now even the trees, everything was bad. The men, everything. She desired to look no more upon them, for they recalled the great masts of ships. So even the trees had been ruined by him. And she retreats, right? She says she's no longer going to stay in and we're kind of jumping forward a little bit right now, but she leaves Armenelos, the capital. She goes to Emerie, which is no trees, which is all pasture lands essentially. She's kind of, I think the house is on the top of a hill a little bit, and she raises and Kalime, their daughter, by herself. After we learn probably the most heart-wrenching moment of the entire, for at least for me, this entire story, where Tolkien wrote about how Aldarion left his daughter. Let me find that.
You want to read that?
Do you have it?
It said something like, yes. You got it.
Yep. The next morning, Aldarion hastened away. He lifted up on Kalime and kissed her, but though she clung to him, he set her down quickly and rode off. Soon after, the great ship set sail from Romena.
Burns. Pain.
Man.
That hit me right there.
It's like and he writes before, he tarried until her 4th birthday. It's sort of like, I'll make it until your birthday. And then I'm gone. I'm out. I'm done.
Which tells
I can't even
you
stand it anymore.
that what the real love in his heart is, it is not for her and his wife. The real love is like he's holding off. He's like being stoic. He's like, I'm going to hold off on what I really love, and I'm going to show that I can do this. Your priorities are wrong, dude. And the more children I've had, the more I dislike Aldarion in this passage. So
I've only had one.
How do you feel about him?
It's, I was telling Jonathan when I read this the first time, it kind of, you read that and you're like, oh, that sucks. It just kind of, it washes over you if you don't actually have a point of reference. And, I think about my daughter and just how much I just love looking at her face, and I can't imagine her clinging to me and me just being like, see ya, I'm going to go leave for 2 years, but really be gone for 5.
Yeah. It's true. It's heartbreaking. My wife had this funny line. She hadn't read this before. So when we were reading it together, and it says, later in that passage, it says, and Erendis was not at the harbor to set the green bow of return, nor did she send. Aldarion's face was dark and troubled as he stood at the prow of Hirelonde, where the wife of his captain had set a great branch of Oyolare. Oyolaire. You got to get the second I in there.
Sorry, yes.
Oyolaire. But he did not look back until the Meneltarma was far off in the twilight. And my wife's like, Oyolaire? What? And so I explained it to her. And after that, every time we talk about it, she just calls it the safety greens. He forgot his safety greens. So that's what I call it now. They're just safety greens. So,
sorry, go ahead. I was just going to say another part that I loved was when he gets back, his house is locked. Nobody's hanging out with him. And then he goes to the palace, and it says something along the lines of, and he received a welcome there that he expected. And it's something like that, like a welcome that he expected. It's implying that nobody was happy to see him. And I saw that line and I was like, good.
The line is, he found his welcome no warmer than he looked for.
Yeah. I saw that and I was like, good.
Exactly.
I hope you're feeling some pain.
Justice. It's really interesting.
So what do you guys think of Ancalime and Erendis? Because she's raising her with no sense of hatred, no uncertain sense of hatred for men, at least by saying there are no men, they're not worth your time. Even the old crone Zamin, thank you. She says to him, they're only good for breaking things and eating, essentially.
Yep. A boy said Zamin, if you know what that is, but how should you? Because she's implying there aren't any men in the house at all. They're breakers and eaters mostly.
Yeah.
That one is ever eating, but not to no purpose. We laughed out loud at the line, they're breakers, and because we've had young boys, they're like, yep, that's basically it. They break things and they eat. And then eventually they can do great things, but you got to get through the breaking and eating stage first. I see a lot of like internal commentary on the relationship between the sexes in this reading that we're doing here, and what can happen when that relationship goes sour and goes wrong.
I will say though, like one of the things that struck me is that, and this is maybe piggybacking a little bit off what you said that I'd never really thought about in great depth before, which is when you're a man, it's a lot easier to write men than it is to write women. When you're a woman, it's a lot easier to write women than it is to write men. And so I feel like with Erendis, we only get her hatred of things. We only get that she hates the sea, that she hates men, that she hates the trees now, right? She loved the trees, but she's driven by that part of her life, right? She leaves Armenelos because of everything that she hates, not because she loves anything. Whereas you could say that Aldarion left because, sure, not because he hated his family, but because he loved the sea. And so there's this weird counterpoint between them. And so I have a hard time relating to Erendis in the way that even how she says to her daughter, your mother will never leave you as long as you love me, not as long as I love you, as long as you love me. And I'm like, oh, our little what's the word for an entangled relationship? Codependence right there, right? So right. I feel like Tolkien wrote her a little bit
Is that what she said?
flat.
What was the
Yeah.
what was the exact line there? I thought it was as long as you live. Did I go over that too fast?
Let's look.
Do not trouble yourself, for you have a mother, and she will not run away while you love her. Yeah. So I mean, she like, you don't get. I and this goes back to the last few episodes. Is I don't get a sense that she loves much in her life. Even Aldarion, I feel like there's no. And you know, we had a whole section where we did talk about what their love means and things like that, but I don't want to go into that. But I feel like Tolkien writes her as a hater of things, and Aldarion in the sense of a lover of things, and they're both, their lives are driven by that aspect of.
Okay, so that's interesting. I take away something different. My takeaway of their character is that, yes, Tolkien does lean into her hatred. That is absolutely right, Jonathan. But what I find interesting is the view of their love of each other, and you can see this through the betrothal stage, the pre-betrothal, then the betrothal, then the after marriage. It seems to be this kind of fate, like this older version of love that was it's very chivalric, it's very le mort d'Arthur, you know, sort of. They're fated to love each other. It's their love for each other is described as a kind of longing that breaks into passion every once in a while, but it's basically like a longing. And Aldarion's love for the sea is that too. It's this longing. It doesn't seem like it satisfies him ever. It's just like he has to go out and do it. And so all these great loves are just longings that then, you know, sometimes break into kind of a passionate sort of thing that we would call love, but then they drift into this sort of cold relationship sort of view of things. It's very interesting. It struck me actually as very sort of British aristocratic. Like, this is a story of aristocratic love and the whole cold structure around royalty and the noble life, which does not engender warmth in relationship. Like, you just look at, I mean, open the news and search for Harry and Meghan, and you can find out, or Diana, and you can find plenty of cautionary tales in that regard. And so it's just it's an interesting take on things, on love itself, which to me seems, I don't see that Erendis is only a hater, but I do think that this is a tragic story. So he's going to focus on the flaws. Sure. And both Erendis and Aldarion ultimately choose to view the world through what has been done to me versus what do I reach out to. It's an eye turned inward on themselves and their own honor and the slights that have been done to them by their spouse or by other people. And it's a very sort of tragic, almost semi-narcissistic picture of what can happen with two people. Anyway, I'm probably reading too much into it, probably too much psychoanalysis, but
I think that was great. I definitely have a lot more empathy for Erendis in this story. I think, I don't know, like Jonathan, like you said, the idea of like being a new dad is so fresh and so vibrant in my mind right now, that the idea of departing right now at this moment, which I feel, I mean, she was 4 in the story, but it would be a similar situation. So I feel very connected in this, in a level of visceral disgust that's very high. So I feel like I'm more apt to feel bad for Erendis, but I think when she starts to become a bad behaving character, when, yes, you know, you are the victim here, you've been wronged, but now she's not loving her daughter, because, Michael, you made a great point. Her daughter still has to be a part of the royal process of Númenor. And even if she didn't, you know, you're still actively trying to take away the opportunity for your daughter to have a meaningful and fulfilling relationship with another person, whoever that person may be. If you're training her up to hate men, you know, you are essentially attempting to take that away from her and make her as jaded and as cynical as you are.
Yeah, you're warping her is what you're doing. And I'm going to quote 2 lines, which are from Ankalime to Aldarion, her father. One 4-year-old Ankalime and the other 9-year-old Ankalime. 4-year-old Ankalime, right before he leaves, she laughed and was merry, though others in the house were not so. And as she went to her bed, she said to her father, "Where will you take me this summer? Tatiana, which is apparently what's the name for
endearment?
Yeah, it's a term of endearment. There's another name for that, but yes, for her father. I should like to see the White House in the sheepland that Mamil tells of. So that's 4-year-old Ankali May. 9-year-old Ankali May. Who are you? She said. And why do you bid me to rise so early before the house is stirring? And before that, it says she stood erect and stiff as her mother and made him no courtesy as he dismounted and came up the steps towards her. So in 5 years, she's forgotten him entirely, and her manner is completely different. She has become like a little mother, like her mother, a miniature version of her mother. And so there's a warping there, like her mother has warped her. I'm not saying that Aldarion doesn't deserve scorn for what he's done, because he does. But two things can be true at once. He can deserve scorn, and his mother can have done the wrong thing in warping their daughter. So, and I think that's what's happening there.
What do you think about the point that as much as she tried to warp Ankali May, he smiled within, for he saw there a child of his own rather than of Erendis for all her schooling. And so even then, just in that short, when he comes back, that short time on the steps of their house in Merier, he sees his child rather than Erendis's child. So
right.
Even
so
that.
Yeah, tip of the hat to the noble character that Tolkien, alludes to quite a bit with Aragorn throughout his, and the royal house of Númenor has a lot of that from their elven heritage, the echoes of that elven heritage and that nobility can be seen, and I think that's we're seeing that here, but it's shallow. Aldarion, he doesn't even smile outwardly. Like, how pathetic is that? Like, okay, so he sees in her him, great. And he doesn't show it, and he doesn't give her anything. He just, again, he does two things in life. He plants trees and he leaves. And so that's what he's doing now. He leaves.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's at this point that she wept from grief, but still
She
more
being
from
Erendis.
anger. She being Erendis, not Ankali May. Ankali May went back to bed because she was tired. She wept from grief, but still more from anger. She had looked for some penitence that he might extend. She was still hoping, in a way, that maybe he'd ask forgiveness, but he knew it was too far gone at this point, right? That he didn't even acknowledge that he was her father. He's like, I'm just a messenger from our Menelaus. And so that was the complete, that was the final abandonment of his family at this point.
Yep.
It was all over.
Moments worth mentioning as well. He had brought back a gift of a ruby ring, it looks like, from Gil-galad, and gives it instead to the wife of his good friend and venturer who went on with him,
Ulbar.
Ulbar.
Love that name.
So obviously intended for his own wife, but he gives it to her instead, not as a way of trying to ingratiate himself with her, but just as a way of ridding himself of the gift that he had for his wife, who he has now abandoned in thought as well as in person. He'd abandoned her in person for a long time, but now in thought. And the other honorable mention moment, which I just was totally random and I thought was funny, was Tolkien, a philologist's sense of humor. He points out that when this massive ship is being built, the first name given to it is Turufonto, the wooden whale. Turufonto, the wooden whale. The wooden whale, they called it, but that was not its name. Such a philologist joke. Like, let's laugh at a name that someone gave a ship that we'll never again mention. So, yeah.
It reminds me of that. Remember, let me bring this up here.
And another thing I appreciated about that was that, if you go back and read that, you don't find out its name until I think a page and a half later. It gives you the wooden whale, and then it's like, but that is not its name. And then it just keeps going, and you're like, well, wait.
Mentally, you're like, what is its name?
What is its name?
Right there, the wooden whale. Remember?
Yes, we've seen this. Yes,
the meme of the huge Númenor.
I'm so glad we didn't get through a whole episode without making fun of Rings of Power anymore.
Well, we started early with it. We can end with it too. Yeah, it occurred to me that they mentioned this boat here, this ship, like this massive ship. Like, I'm thinking, we have enormous cruise ships that are like 40 stories tall now, like underwater and above water. They're huge. I don't know.
They're disgusting.
They are kind of disgusting.
Displays of just the downfall of society.
Well, they are our towers of Babel, right? They're the thing that we can do. We're proving we can do it on the water too.
Yeah, but here he's building one, and there was a blueprint for the show that said like, no, these ships are actually supposed to be pretty massive. They're supposed to be these huge sailing vessels that would dwarf anything else in the sea. And yep, we didn't.
Apparently, that's how they do it.
Another part I liked a lot was you should make your own bed before trying to change the world. Or, I mean, you should let a king first rule his house well, ere he correct others. Another Jordan Peterson reference. But yeah, I was like, and that's like he's.
You need to pick up your room, Aldarion.
You should go bloody home.
What are you doing, bucko?
So glad you guys leaned into that.
Oh man,
that's fantastic.
But yeah. So like he tells him like,
we love Jordan
go home,
don't we, folks?
And we love Freedom Tunes.
Yes.
So there's that. Sorry, I'm not supposed to say that out loud.
So yeah, I like that. And then they have that interchange of like, where is my home? It's like where your wife is. And then he goes home and he's like, well, I came here and to find my wife. Apparently I don't have one anymore, but I still have a daughter, right? And so he's like, well, I don't have a home with you. That's so I like that sort of through point of like, your home is where your wife is. And then he says, I just don't have a wife anymore, to her. So I thought that
I really liked, I like that line for multiple reasons. Your home is where your wife is, because, one, that's just a beautiful perspective. Your home is where the people that you're responsible for taking care of are. Yeah. But also it's true to Aldarion's character in a much more surface level way, because if you think about it, the whole story, his life in Númenor, he really didn't have a home. If anything, he liked to live on his stupid little houseboat. So, that statement is like really more true for him than anybody else in Númenor. Like, dude, what home, dude? You don't even care about your house that you were living in. So it might as well just be wherever your wife is at. So I thought that's
a good point. I am going to finish by reading the most passive aggressive set of sentences that I've ever read from Tolkien, which are the final conversation between Aldarion and Erendis in this reading, and which includes the line that you have referenced, Jonathan. But I see in it both sides. I see the both, because it starts out with Erendis's. So this is after Aldarion has slept in the guest room. So she's relegated him to the guest room, basically telling him, you aren't sleeping in the marriage bed, so you can sleep on your own. And he doesn't say that he doesn't have a wife at that point until after that. So right. Then he wakes up in the morning and he gets ready to leave early, and he's greeted at the door by Erendis, who we're told was up all night, which implies this whole thing where they both kind of want to go back to marriage, but they can't get over themselves to do it. And then she says, here are the lines, just like you can hear the venom and the passive aggressive nature in both of these, her lines and his response. You leave more promptly than you came, my lord, she said. I hope that, being a mariner, you have not found this house of women irksome already to go thus before your business is done. Indeed, what business brought you hither? May I learn it before you leave? It's so cold. It's like,
oh my gosh.
And his response was, I was told in Armenelos that my wife was here and had removed my daughter hither, he answered. As to the wife, I am mistaken, it seems. But have I not a daughter? I was like, dude, your life, your marriage is over. These two sentences you have ruined everything, but from both of you. I mean, like, it's just basically she's accusing him of basically, which, I mean, she's slightly more in the right here than he is, although she did make it clear that we're not married anymore by denying him his own room and his bed, at least in practice. And so it is just, I was like, ooh, the temperature just like drops 20 degrees in the room.
Yeah. And well, you finished the last line too, is having not a daughter. You had one some years ago, but my daughter has not yet risen.
Yeah.
She makes the point, it's not your daughter, it's my daughter. And so like, you're going to lean into this whole marriage is over thing. Well, I'm just going to double down and start signing the papers.
Yep.
So, yeah. Yeah.
All right.
Hey, I want one other last thing I wanted to point out. Well, I don't know. You weren't here last week, Evan, when we were talking about it. In the wedding, they're given the elves come, right? And my assumption was it's the elves from Middle Earth that came to his wedding because that's who he was. That's who he was spending time with, and Gil-galad was there. But I think now, after reading a little bit more in here, I really think it's the elves from Valinor, from Tol Eressëa, right? From the because the birds, when they leave here, which way do they fly? They fly west.
Yeah.
And so I think it's really the elves from the Undying Lands that came and visited them because they still had relations, right? They would still sometimes come.
I just assumed that just because they would come there every once in a while.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Right.
that's a good point. Never noticed that before.
Right, and also the elves have to explain both the tree that they give as a present, the flowers, and the birds. Which, since he's been to Middle Earth,
No, that's a good point too.
He would have known about that. He's been cavorting with elves in Middle Earth anyway, so it would have been the elves from Tol Eressëa bringing plants and beasts unknown to the Númenorians.
That's a good point. All right, guys. Whew. Man, it's getting deep into an unfinished tale. And then we're going to finish it. So
Prove it again. We can drag out even 5 pages into a long discussion.
There's so much in here. I mean, this is like, a full season or 2 on HBO for this series, right? Everything that's going on here could be just drawn out and made completely gray so that George R. R. Martin would love it. All right, next week we're going to read up to the point that says the further course of the narrative, which is the final section that is prose, and the rest has notes from Christopher Tolkien. So we'll read up through that point, and then we'll do one more episode after that, and maybe even one more talking about like what would this story have looked like if they would have tried to finish it and go out to there. So everybody, thanks for listening. Mixer, thanks for joining us. We are going to go into our extended podcast. So we hope you join us there. If you want to hear that, everybody, you got to become a member, theonering.com/member. I'm a broken record, but they say you have to say something like a dozen times before people start remembering it. So I'm just going to say it 12 times right now. Go to the one. No, I'm joking. Just go to theonering.com/member. Become a member, and we'll see you on the other side.